Hello, everyone. We are here with Chris Robinson and, of course, Wowhead site manager Perculia to do an interview about Legion art. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. This is awesome.
And you want to start right off?
I'll start it off. So we saw these beautiful zones, and what were the visual inspirations for the new zones, and how do you give each zone a unique feel while keeping them, thematically cohesive around Legion?
Yeah, absolutely. So we pull a lot from the natural world, but also just from the imagination of the artists that are doing the concept art. So some of it is, like in this instance, it was the Greek Isles, so we're looking at trees and rocks and just natural environments that we feel like are cool and that kind of inspire us as a team. And we've done quite a few of these, so we get to a point where we run out of like real world stuff that we can pull from. And then thankfully we have awesome concept artists who can come in and just do, we start to think about color and form and, like the natural, like I said, rocks and trees that make anything up or make these zones up. And so we'll sometimes start there. We'll start with like just even a tree and go, okay, that's a really cool shape. We really like how it feels like it reflects kind of the evil nature of this environment or the whimsical nature of the environment. And then kind of start doing more supportive rocks and things like that, and then really start to hone in on, okay, we feel like it's a really nice overall picture of what what would make up this environment, pull in some colors, and then kind of do that final pass on like, this is, the trees, the rocks, the grass, the sky, and everything as it's kind of coming together. So it's hard to answer because it's not necessarily something where it's like we look at a real world example and then we pull in 50% creativity. It's always just a balance of those things to get us to where we kind of end up.
Were there any zones that were particularly challenging or ones that you found like to be the most fun to design?
Every zone was the most challenging, which is actually, and I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. It's just that that's kind of where the creativity comes from. So if it's not difficult and it's not chaotic when we're doing this stuff and we just hit it right off the bat, it's going to be one-dimensional and boring. So, so Broken Isles, for instance, and when you very first land on this land that's torn up and it was, initially supposed to be risen from the sea. So we were going to do this like, it's all coral and things that feels like it came off the bottom of the seafloor. And so we did that, and we took a look at it, and demon invasions happening, and all this crazy stuff's going on, and the environment didn't really reflect that. It felt like kind of this serene, nice place that I wanted to hang out, or you would want to hang out in. And so in that instance, we'll go like, okay, what's not working here? We really want to get like one message across, and if that's the strongest message, how do we really convey that in a way where we can cut out all the extraneous stuff? So in that case, it was really just a lot of back and forth with design to talk about. Let's play through it. Let's get a feeling for what's working and what's not. Start to cut some stuff out, reconcept a few things, and then ultimately we ended up saying like, this is important to really sell the idea of like what happens when the demons fully come in and Legion just takes something over, destroys everything, and turns it into what it is now. And that's the tone we wanted to go with. That's that note that we wanted to hit. So once we have that and we know that, we can really start to hone in on let's get rid of all the extraneous stuff. Let's not do the coral and the seabed stuff and really just focus in on full-on demon invasion. That's not necessarily my most favorite zone. It was just one of the more challenging ones. But it's then at that point about setting that pace of like any good book where you go from one area where it's super scary and intense and you're really into it. You need that moment to kind of come out and breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
So we always try at that point to then introduce the next idea as something that's very contrary to where you've just been at. And in a way, those things start to line up and tell their own stories. So it becomes easier to go, okay, now we're going into this next thing. Here's the color scheme. We want it to be evil and dark. And then we kind of just like flow from there,
Cool.
So when the class halls were being designed, what factors went into making sure that each one really embodied the thematic feel of the class?
So those were fun because it's an opportunity for us to really go in and focus in on what classes are all about. And that's anytime we can do that in the game, it's really beneficial to help people feel like they can identify with their class and know that it's something that really, really exemplifies what it means to be that class in the game. So interestingly enough, when we were working on artifacts and class halls at the same time, we kind of had a lot of that overlap where we were like, okay, this is the visual stuff that we're going with these artifacts. Let's make sure we're pulling those elements in. And then a lot of it too is just the things that you really see in armor sets that we've done in the past, class-specific props or buildings or anything, like taking a look at all of that stuff that exists and really boiling it down to like what makes it Paladin and what are the things that we've told before, whether it be visual storytelling in armor sets or buildings or props or armor or anything. And let's make sure we're keying in on those things and then blowing it up to a level where when you walk in, you're just like, yeah, this is exactly what I would hopefully expect if I'm walking into that.
Yeah, so you just mentioned artifact weapons, and we're curious as to how it is determined, like what style and variations end up with each class's artifact weapons and each spec's artifact weapons, and there's different, variants of each one. Like, what goes into that process?
So initially, it's exactly like order halls in the sense that we're trying to first and foremost hit the tone for what the class and the spec is all about. And so a lot of that stuff was, I mean, a few of them were easy because it was established in lore. They were things that we knew about. They were weapons we've seen before, or we've heard about or read about. The ones that were difficult were the ones that weren't necessarily established, and we had to kind of go, well, let's come up with something that feels comparable, that it has the same, it's steeped in the same amount of lore as the other weapons that we know about. And then at that point, it's okay, what is the core fantasy behind this? What's the class fantasy that makes me, as an assassination rogue, pick this dagger up and go like, okay, that feels like what I want my character to feel like. And a lot of that's, we all play the game, we're all passionate about it. I play rogue, and so that was one for me. I'm like, over and over again, like, let's make sure that, nice. Well, it's the best, let's be honest. So, it's personal experience. It's pulling from things that already exist in the game that we've done previously, and then really, like I keep harping on, it's boiling it down to that core thematic essence of what we really want to get across, and then making sure that as you go into spec differentiation, that you're really honing in on like that exactly. Okay, it feels and reads most like rogue first and foremost, and then when I look closer, that secondary read is this is the spec that I'm going for.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that actually ties into our next question. We wanted to ask you what it was like to create a brand new weapon when you've already got some artifacts like Doomhammer, and if, sort of what's the process of creating a weapon from scratch to be as memorable as something like Ashbringer, and were there any weapons that were particularly tricky to decide upon for a spec?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, it was actually... So what we wanted to do initially was you have your base artifact level, and it's kind of it should be equal to an epicness, Ashbringer, for instance. And so we kind of use that as a base, like Ashbringer and a few other weapons that we knew existed at the level, and that we could always go back to and go, this is what player expectations are for an epic level artifact weapon. And using that as a reference, then we can go through and go, okay, when we're doing the base level for each race, we can then kind of pull out those elements and go, it's feeling comparable, and it feels like, if you hold them next to each other, they have the same level of like epicness. The problem with that is that when it's not steeped in lore and it doesn't have that deep traditional feeling of, that something that players really identify with, what ended up happening was we had to go above and beyond with those so that they would feel in a weird way equal to what Ashbringer already was. So we actually went through, and all the ones that weren't well known, if you look, their base levels are probably just a little bit more visually interesting or complicated than something like Ashbringer. And then at that point, it's just thinking about, once again, the spec and the class. Some of the difficult things were just coming up with, okay, if I'm a shaman, and we were thinking about hammers and how it relates to Thrall and all the story that went behind Doomhammer and different versions of that, and how do we make sure that it still reads as Doomhammer if we're introducing all these other chaotic elements or natural elements. And then kind of through that process going like, okay, now we're playing with it, and I'm holding these things in game, and it feels like, okay, we've sold the fantasy that it's a Doomhammer-ish weapon. I get the sense that now it's it's more spec specific within that world, but it's something just doesn't feel right, because seeing two of them at the same time just feels like, why are there two Doomhammers?
Yeah.
So then it's making decisions like, what can we do that's supportive of that, where maybe it's like a magical magma hammer that has the same silhouette and shape, but then it doesn't break that fantasy of suddenly like, now you're just like, we're giving away Doomhammers.
Buy one, get one free.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on to Demon Hunters, I actually got to stream the demo of Legion yesterday. It was really exciting,
nice.
And people were like begging to see all the customization because there's so many options. Like, it seems like Demon Hunters, between the tattoos and the blindfolds and the skin variations, like there's so many things you can do to customize Demon Hunters. And we were wondering like what went into that, and also is there any updates planned for other races to have further customizations?
Yeah, definitely. So for the Demon Hunters, we took a look at what we did with Death Knight and wanted to say, let's use that as sort of our base. Like, if that's the bare minimum level of epic kind of customization and specific, like, really custom feel that we want to give to this new Demon Hunter. And then we want to give it 30% more at least. So let's make Demon Hunters Death Knights plus. And given that information, we just took a look at like how much, where's the customization at? What's the fantasy behind? Like, I get to play Illidan essentially, right? I mean, not literally, but it's the fantasy behind, he's the Demon Hunter guy, and if I'm coming in and I'm Blood Elf or Night Elf, and that's always been something about that culture that's really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Making sure that the first time I get in there and I'm flipping through those options, I'm not like, oh, this doesn't, what? Like, I don't get what's going on here. It has to be really like, yes, that's exactly hitting the fantasy of what Illidan is, and now how can we build off of that and make it even more aesthetically enticing, to make sure that people feel like they have that depth in customization, and we don't look just like each other because we happen to be Demon Hunters. So a lot of it was, there's so many cool aspects to them, whether it be the blinding process that they go through to kind of take on those demonic powers, or the tattoos that form after they go through that process. And those hits are something that we've always wanted to, and we hear from players consistently, like, when can we have tattoos? When can we do, a lot of that stuff that the demon hunters are actually is like a core part of their kit.
Yeah.
So it was taking a look at the existing demon hunter iconography, whether it be the tattoos and the skull, the horns and the eyepieces and everything, and then really blowing out like how can we make an eye covering not just a wrap, but we can do that's like interesting and over the top of that.
Yeah, the wings are awesome too.
Cool. Well, wings are like default.
There's especially when
you glide.
The first time you see it, it's like when you're like spacebar, what?
Yeah. No, we were so fired up about that too.
Yeah.
Because one of the designers was like, why don't we just have the wings pop out? Because we were just kind of gliding down. And that's one of those situations where we're always like, how can we reinforce the fantasy that's here? And if I'm gliding towards the ground and I'm a demon hunter, of course I'm going to use my wings. Like, It seems default.
Yeah.
We didn't have it at first, and then when we put it in, we're like, oh, that's exactly what we should.
So I had a question actually about animations. In the Gamescom trailer, it sort of hinted at new flashy animations for melee classes. Or curious, is that something that's a work in the pipeline, or are there any more details on that?
Yeah, it's definitely still in progress, and we're going to continue working on it for quite some time now. The idea really is that we wanted to feel, the goal being ultimately that we wanted you to feel like the combat was familiar to what you've known so far, but it's just poppier. Like it has a little bit more snap, and you feel like you're really making contact and things are happening in a way where it's engaging and it feels like you're locked in combat and not just kind of passively swinging your sword back and forth and doing some damage. So we're still in the process of tying all that together. Really, there were some very small things that happened in that the animation and the design process that made such a big difference that we didn't really think about initially. And things like, when damage numbers come up on the top of your head, but previously were just happening mathematically to say like, this is how much health you're losing and this is when you're losing it. And we found that tying those things to timing, to when you're actually making a hit to a character, would give you that visceral feeling of like, oh wow, I just hit that guy, I just did damage, and now I saw maybe it was a little bit less than it would have been previously, because I think previous to that we were actually adding things up and then doing it, big hit damage at a certain time. But seeing smaller damage when those things actually happen made you feel way more connected to that process. So what we're doing now is just making sure that we're making all those little decisions and honing in on what are the things that really support that combat and make it feel like you're in there clashing.
Cool. Now, do you have any new like spell effects or visuals or animations that you can talk about, like that are coming up in Legion for?
Spell effect. We have. Previous to this, we've only had a couple of spell effects artists on the team, and we now have 3 effects artists who are working full time doing effects. A lot of that stuff is going to happen in the combat system. There's a lot of really awesome stuff, whether it's the new Demon Hunter stuff or other classes that we're kind of working on to make sure that we're pepping them up.
Who's getting pepped up? Or Rogue's getting pepped up? They're kind of...
It's just all Rogue, because like I said, I play Rogue, so we're going to do... No, I'm just kidding. It's an even... We respect all classes equally. Not really. But, yeah, it's hard to call out specifics. I think it's more just about... As I talk about, the damage numbers and the things that are the little parts that make the combat system new and unique, the effects were something that we took a look at and we went, this is really, whether it be the colors didn't really hit the fantasy of what your class was all about, and you may be using some shamanistic ability, but it doesn't really feel like it's lightning or fire or anything. It's just a color. So we went through and we did a whole pass on just things that are class specific, that affect your animation, that are effects that fire off when you're doing those things. Mm-hmm. And it's once again something we found that just really starts to reinforce what it's about to be that class. So nothing specific where I can be like, yes, you're going to do this one ability that looks like this. It's more just those little iterative kind of improvements that we're making at this point.
Awesome. So, talking a little bit about character models, we've heard that NPCs like Greymane, they're getting character updates in Legion. What's the process to determine which famous NPCs get updates, and how do you determine, what parts of their model need, like a new armor set or like a new hairstyle and, glowy eyes, all that good stuff?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, it's how much we're going to be interacting with them. So we'll see early on, and it actually develops somewhat organically through the process, whether it be in the gameplay and the questing and the storytelling. We'll see them come back again and again, and then we'll start to get this sense of like, we're seeing them quite a bit, and it just doesn't feel like once we did the new player race updates, it was like I'm standing next to this guy and it feels like he's super ancient and he doesn't look as cool as I am, yet he's this like storied hero in the game. So that's something that we kind of organically use as a cue to say, let's put some love into this character model. At that point, a lot of them are, it varies. So they're either dressed NPCs, which means they're basic player character models. Much like a player character, they'll just use armor that's existing in the game. And if we have imagery from them previously, we'll dress them as close as we can to match that imagery. Or there'll be a model that was, like Maev was a custom model that was made a long time ago. And she doesn't use any of the same technology as player characters. It's all like totally custom armor that she has. So based on those two things, those two factors determine, okay, now we're going to go in and try to maintain that same armor set vibe that they have going on, or we're going to really blow out that custom model that we've been working on. So we'll pull all that out of the game, make it so it's not just a general NPC that's dressed, so it's a unique model, and then take a look at like, here are the visual cues that feel like they're really, the things that sell the character and what we really need to hone in on, and then identify the other areas that we can kind of go crazy and build out from there.
That's cool. Now, we know that Sylvanas is going to be getting a major model update.
Yeah, it's cool.
And we were wondering if there's any other like fan favorite characters or like easily recognizable characters that we're also going to see getting model updates in Legion.
Well, yeah, let's see. So the whole Sylvanas thing initially between she and Varian was just a really awesome opportunity to take both of those characters to an area that we've never seen before. Varian, for me, interestingly, with him was less about making him more epic and more about using visual cues with his armor and his dressing to tell the story of what's going on with him. So, this in the beginning sequence, and yes, did you see the pre-render and everything? So he's all about that struggle that he's going through to, in this battle, in this moment where he's realizing something about himself and he's changing as a character and changing as a person. And for me, that's way more about the subtlety in his character and really honing in on what he means and what's important to him and getting a sense for who he is as a person, rather than just like, oh, what is he, how can we give him bigger shoulder pads and a bigger cape and bigger weapons? And the depth there, I think, is really important. So with him, it was actually taking away armor and repainting certain things, and we were always iterating on him. So for instance, the pre-render is different from the in-game cinematic. So the in-game cinematic uses the game model, and then the in-game cinematic team takes it and they spruce it up a little bit with more animations and do some close-up work so that it holds up on camera in areas that the in-game model might not have. And so they'll repaint some stuff, and this time around, like they repainted the scar that goes across his nose. And so we'll take that from them and put it back in the game. And that process, those kind of things are really interesting to see how they just develop organically because of the fidelity needs, but it actually ends up informing the character more and more down the line as we continue to develop them. So long answer, but Varian is really cool in that sense.
Awesome. So everyone always asks us this: are there further character model tweaks planned in Legion, and are there anything happening for like Worgen or Goblins or Pandaren, or is that pretty much set now after Warlords?
So I don't want to say anything set. That's a great question because there are plans and then there's reality, So yes, there are plans. Like there's plans for everything. I mean, I think you could take any one of those characters and you could blow them out and do an entire expansion just on their race and where they come from, and really much in the same way that we're kind of doing with Demon Hunters, tell a deeper story about them. We have that list, that's like and it's probably longer than the list that you guys have, where you're like, oh, we want to have, tattoos on our dwarves and mohawks and things like that. Did you about
talking about like moose horns?
Oh
Yeah.
Alex Afraziabi and his moose horns. I blame him for that.
It's like a blessing and a curse. We want it. We want it bad.
Yeah. So being able to, play as a player character with moose horns.
Yes. Amazing.
I am right there with you. And I think it's just a matter of, it's not that we're going like, no, we don't want to do, we know you want those things, but you can't have them. It's more just kind of, we have to prioritize everything. And, we want to make sure that we're getting this stuff out in a way where it's fulfilling how much our players want to see from us. And so we're always making those cuts of like, okay, we know we want to do those things. We got to put them off because we really want to focus on making Demon Hunters the best experience it could possibly be. Am I really that boring?
No, I'm so sorry.
Jeez.
No,
Do you want me to
not
dance?
Jeez. Yes.
We could do the rest and interpretive dance if that.
No, I'm so sorry. So anyways, not boring at all.
Okay.
We know that all the classes are going to have a very unique feel with like artifact weapons. And how do you feel that you've really accomplished that, making each individual class and each individual spec feel unique to every other individual class and individual spec?
So I think that's a balance that we're constantly fighting with, and I wouldn't necessarily say that we've 100% achieved what we ultimately want to do, because it's always going to develop along with the classes and the characters. But this time around, it was really about artifacts, doing those early on and knowing the visual direction that we were going to take with those. Typically, we do anywhere from like 550 to 700 unique weapons per expansion, and this time it was 240.
Wow.
So we really packed that in up front. We knew we were going to do, we knew we were going to make it cool. So we took all that work and we front-loaded it, and then what that allowed us to do is we took a look at, as we started working on armor sets, we were really using the visual decisions that we had made with artifacts and then layering those things on top of the armor sets. So this time around, I think you'll see a lot of, what we wanted to achieve is if I'm the spec, I'm wielding this artifact. We obviously can't do armor sets for every spec and every class.
I was just going to ask you about that.
But yeah, so what we did was kind of took a look at the wash of all the artifacts, like in each unique class and each unique spec, and then pulled visual elements from as much as we possibly could, so that there is hopefully something in the armor that you're getting where you're like, oh, that's cool. It looks like that, that little skull or that fire detail that I saw on my weapon, and feels like it's a cohesive kind of vision of what your character should look like in your class.
Cool. Any last questions?
Yeah, so for the general armor sets in Legion, like not the raid sets, but dungeons and questing, do they have any specific cohesive theme, like elven or demonic, or are they just sort of generic sets? Like Northrend was very kind of brown, and Northrend was kind of brown. So
gone and you're saying generic. What's going on around? There are no generic sets. It varies. I mean, I think, for Warlords, for instance, we really wanted to focus in on the world and make sure that the world was coming through in all the armor set design. This time around, it was a little bit less about that, because the story is not necessarily just about Broken Shore. It's about demon hunters and what's going on in the world. So, and obviously with artifacts, it allowed us the opportunity to focus more on class this time around. So I think you're probably going to see more of that and less about world design that's affecting the armor set.
So there's like more, even like the quest, it's like the dungeon, like it's more themed for, it sort of reflects your class more than just like, oh, everything in this zone has like and like a Broken Isles like elven theme.
A little bit, but there's some of that too. I mean, it's a nice balance.
That's
we
good.
wanted to make sure that as you were experiencing new cultures in the world, that you were also getting some armor pieces that felt like, oh, that's cool.
Especially with the transmog system. I
Yeah,
want to have,
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
to have all those styles.
So hopefully it's a good mix of those things. We always try to find that balance and not really, because there's a lot of people who prefer one or the other, and we want to make sure we're not just weighing it too heavily on one side. So
Awesome.
Yeah, well, we are very, very excited for Legion, and we're excited to see all the art stuff. And like I said, I got to play the demo yesterday, and it was really fun. And there were some new people, like some new models we hadn't seen. It was very
I love
large,
seeing, like, the
ugly
black
woman.
hair. like the black hair, and then like the different like scales on your face you could get as a demon.
Oh,
hunter,
yeah.
Oh,
and
yeah.
all like the horns and the spikes, all those.
And
things.
it looks so ornate too. Like
Yeah.
when you're on the original screen, and you see a demon hunter. It's like, oh my god, they
Even their
look.
starting armor is great.
Yeah, their starting armor is really amazing.
Well, I'm glad you guys are stuck. We're actually really happy with it too. We kind of got to the point where we were looking at, it's always in process, So
Yeah.
we finally, before BlizzCon, we're looking at how everything came together, and that's the coolest moment, when you get to kind of, because we see all these things piecemeal, like different people working on different things. So when you see them come together in that character create screen, and you can actually scroll through your options and see how they all relate to each other, a lot of times that's actually the first time that we really even see that holistic vision of what we were initially set out to do. So we're super glad to hear that you guys are digging it, because we're pretty happy with it.
Yeah, when I was on stream yesterday, there was a bunch of people watching, and I was just sitting there randomizing, because people were so interested, because it's crazy, because you hit the random button, and it almost looks like a completely different, I mean, there's so many different horns and skins and scales and tattoos. I mean, the variation in Demon Hunters is crazy.
Awesome.
Crazy. So we're really, really excited about it. Thank you so much for sitting down with us
Absolutely.
for an
Thank
interview
you guys.
today.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for yawning. I do this thing where I'm like, don't interrupt, don't breathe, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I haven't breathed in 2 minutes. Like,
And you just slowly pass out.
so I, yawn, passed out. I don't know which would have been worse.
Probably
I apologize.
yawn's probably better.
I apologize. But thank you so much for sitting down with us. It was a
Absolutely.
lot of fun, and we're really excited for Legion. So
Great.
thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see y'all soon.